The chandeliered halls of the Kensington estate were usually silent, a museum of wealth where footsteps echoed against marble floors. Daniel Hargrave, a man whose name was whispered in financial circles, believed in order, in silence, in the perfection of polished surfaces and untouchable luxury. His life was a fortress built of routine, schedules, and unbending discipline. But within this fortress lived a fragile heart, his son Oliver. Oliver was only 12, confined to a wheelchair after a tragic car accident that had stolen his mother and his ability to walk. Since then, the boy's laughter had dimmed, his eyes more often filled with shadows than light. Daniel had given him the best doctors, therapists, and tutors money could buy, but something priceless was missing from his world: joy. On that late autumn afternoon, Daniel returned home earlier than expected. He entered the grand hallway, already annoyed at the faint sound of music coming from the east wing, where his son's room was located. He never tolerated disorder in his house, and music, especially something playful, was rarely part of the air inside. He followed the melody, footsteps growing sharper against the marble. But when he reached the doorway, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, in the middle of Oliver's spacious room, stood Rosa, the cleaner, a woman from humble beginnings who came 3 days a week to scrub the vast estate. She was holding Oliver's small hands, twirling him in his wheelchair as though he were standing, his laughter rising and spilling into the air like golden sunlight. She wasn't dressed for a ballroom, only in her faded uniform and sneakers, yet she moved with grace, swaying, spinning, humming along to the music. Oliver's face shone with a smile Daniel had not seen in years. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. His instinct was to clear his throat, to snap, to remind her of her place. But instead, he found himself frozen, captivated by the sight. Rosa bent down, her dark curls falling forward as she whispered something into Oliver's ear. Whatever it was, it made the boy laugh so hard he clapped his hands against his chair's armrest, eyes sparkling like they used to when his mother was alive. Daniel stepped inside, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Rosa turned abruptly, startled, and her hands flew away from Oliver's. The music played on from the small speaker, but the laughter was gone, replaced by silence so thick it nearly suffocated. I'm sorry, sir," Rosa stammered, her cheeks flushing red. "I was only—" But Oliver interrupted, his voice trembling with urgency. "No, Papa. Please don't be angry. Rosa was just dancing with me. I wanted to feel like I was standing again, just for a moment." Daniel's eyes flickered from his son to the cleaner. Anger wrestled with something else inside him. An ache, a memory, the echo of his late wife twirling Oliver around the very same room, music spilling from the old record player she adored. He could almost see her ghostly figure overlapping Rosa's movements, and for the first time in years, his iron composure cracked. Instead of rebuking her, Daniel walked toward them slowly, his gaze unreadable. Rosa bowed her head, ready for dismissal. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Her 2 children relied on the money, and though she scrubbed floors in silence most days, she had always seen the sadness in Oliver's eyes, a sadness she couldn't ignore. So she gave him something simple, music, laughter, and the reminder that he was still a boy. Daniel stopped in front of them, towering over Rosa, his voice low but steady. "Play the song again." Rosa blinked, confused. Oliver looked up at his father with wide eyes. "Papa." Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line, but then, to Rosa's utter disbelief, he extended his hand, not to her, but to his son. "If there's dancing in this house, then I should not be a stranger to it." Oliver gasped. Rosa hesitated, but Oliver grabbed his father's hand eagerly, his small fingers gripping tight. Rosa restarted the song, her heart pounding with uncertainty. Then, something extraordinary happened. The millionaire, cold, disciplined, feared in boardrooms and admired for his ruthless success, bent down beside his son's wheelchair and began to move. Awkwardly at first, stiff as though his body had forgotten what joy felt like, but Oliver's laughter guided him. Soon, Daniel found a rhythm, swaying the wheelchair in time with the music, spinning it gently as if it were his son's dance partner. Oliver squealed with delight, and Rosa, tears welling in her eyes, joined them, clapping her hands and stepping in to guide their movements. The 3 of them danced together, wealth, humility, and innocence blending in a harmony no fortune could buy. And for the first time in years, the great mansion was filled not with silence, but with laughter. Yet what Daniel did next would astonish even Rosa, for it was not just about the dance. Daniel's breath grew uneven, not from exertion, but from something deeper, something he had buried for far too long. As Oliver's laughter filled the room, the sound struck him like lightning, splitting apart the heavy stones of grief he had carried since the accident. For years, he had told himself that shielding Oliver with doctors, tutors, and money was enough. That control and security would protect them both from pain. But as he moved his son's chair in gentle circles, he realized that all his wealth had failed to buy the one thing Oliver craved most: to feel alive again. When the song ended, Oliver was breathless, his cheeks flushed with happiness. Rosa reached over to lower the music, her hands trembling slightly as she dared to glance at Daniel. His face, usually as stern and polished as the mahogany walls of his study, had softened. Lines of weariness seemed to melt away, revealing a man not of marble, but of flesh, of memory, of longing. "Play another," Daniel said quietly, and it was not a command but a request. Rosa obeyed. The next melody was slower, something tender, and Daniel lowered himself onto his knees so he could be at Oliver's eye level. He placed his hands gently on his son's, guiding them into the rhythm of the song. Oliver, brimming with joy, looked at his father as though he were seeing him for the first time. "Papa," Oliver whispered, "you're dancing." Daniel swallowed hard. "I am, my boy. For you." Rosa turned away, blinking back tears she couldn't stop. She had not expected this. She had only wanted to give Oliver a taste of happiness, a fleeting moment to forget his pain. But instead, she had unlocked something far greater, a bridge between father and son that grief had nearly destroyed. When the music ended again, silence lingered, but this time it was warm, like the afterglow of a fire. Oliver clapped his hands eagerly. "Again. Please, Papa, again." Daniel chuckled, the sound so rare that Rosa almost gasped. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Oliver's forehead. "All right, but Rosa, you'll join us this time. I'm clumsy at this." Her eyes widened. "Sir, That's an order," he said, though his tone carried none of the sharpness it once did. And so, the cleaner from the modest neighborhood, the millionaire in his tailored suit, and the boy in his wheelchair danced together again, a trio bound not by class or circumstance, but by something purer, joy reborn. The hours slipped away unnoticed. Rosa eventually excused herself, saying she needed to finish her duties, but Daniel surprised her once more. "Leave the chores for today. I'll see they're handled. For now, your work here is more important than any polished floor." She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. But the look in his eyes left no room for doubt. That evening, at the long dining table usually set for one, Daniel invited Rosa to sit and eat with them. The staff gawked, whispering in corners, but he ignored them. Oliver beamed, chatting animatedly about the songs they had danced to, asking Rosa about her favorite music, and even about her children. "You have children?" Daniel asked, surprised. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "Two. A boy and a girl. They're younger than Oliver. I raised them on my own." A flicker of respect crossed Daniel's features. "And yet, you find time to bring joy to my son." Rosa lowered her gaze. "Sometimes joy is more powerful than medicine, sir. Forgive me if I overstepped." But Oliver shook his head fiercely. "Papa, she didn't overstep. She helped me feel like I could dance again, like Mama used to." The mention of his late wife stilled the room. Daniel's throat tightened, but instead of retreating into silence as he usually did, he reached for his son's hand. "Your mother would have wanted this," he murmured. "She would have wanted us to dance again." From that night, the mansion began to change. Music returned to the halls. Rosa was no longer just a cleaner. She became Oliver's dance partner, his confidant, the spark that drew laughter back into his fragile heart. And Daniel, though still the powerful businessman in the outside world, allowed himself to soften at home. He began to join their dances, awkward but earnest, slowly reclaiming the humanity he thought had been buried with his wife. Word spread quietly among the staff, then beyond the estate. Some whispered that the cold-hearted tycoon had lost his mind, while others said he had finally found his soul. Business partners who once only saw him as ruthless began to notice subtle changes. He listened more, his eyes less guarded, his tone less cutting. It was as though the act of dancing with his son had shaken loose a part of himself he had long denied. One evening, Oliver made a request that startled them both. "Papa, can we have a dance party? Not just us, but with Rosa's children too. I want them to come here. I want to show them how we dance." Rosa's heart stopped. She couldn't imagine her children stepping foot into such grandeur. But Daniel, without hesitation, nodded. "Invite them. This house is too large for silence. Let it be filled with children's laughter. And so, a week later, the mansion that once echoed with emptiness was alive with giggles and clumsy footsteps. Rosa's little boy and girl ran down the marble corridors, their laughter bouncing off the walls. Oliver wheeled himself beside them, his face glowing as he introduced them to every room, every corner he had once seen only as a gilded prison. That night, with music pouring from the speakers, they all danced. Rosa's children twirled and hopped, Oliver clapped to the beat, and Daniel, even in his polished shoes and expensive shirt, joined them without shame. The great millionaire bent low, spinning Rosa's little girl around, her squeals of delight ringing through the chandeliers. Rosa stood still for a moment, watching, tears streaming freely down her face. Never in her life had she imagined her children dancing in a palace, welcomed not as intruders, but as guests. Daniel caught her gaze and gave the smallest of smiles. For a man known for never showing weakness, that single smile was a revelation. The shock came not from his dancing, nor from his acceptance of Rosa's children, but from what he began to build afterward. For Daniel Hargrave did not stop with music and laughter. He began to envision something greater, something that would reach far beyond the walls of his estate. The weeks unfolded into months, and what had begun as a fleeting moment of music in a lonely mansion transformed into a movement that would touch countless lives. Daniel Hargrave, once a man defined by his wealth and feared for his cold efficiency, began to see the true poverty that had been gnawing at his soul. It was not the absence of money that crippled him, but the absence of laughter, warmth, and the courage to embrace life's imperfections. Rosa had reminded him of this, not with eloquence or power, but with a simple dance in the presence of a boy who longed to feel free. He made changes that shocked not only his household, but also society itself. The grand ballroom, untouched for years, was restored not for lavish galas or business dinners, but for children like Oliver. Children in wheelchairs, children who could not run and twirl, but could still feel music stir their hearts. He opened the estate every weekend, inviting families with special needs children to gather, to laugh, and to dance without fear of judgment. The chandeliers sparkled above them, not as symbols of cold luxury, but as stars in a universe of joy. Oliver became the heart of it all. Once withdrawn and silent, he blossomed into a beacon of hope. He greeted each child with the same words, "Come, let's dance," his wheelchair spinning with delight as he led them across the polished floors. Parents wept quietly in corners, seeing their children treated not as fragile burdens, but as celebrated guests in a palace that once belonged to silence. Rosa, always at the center, guided them, her movements graceful and her laughter infectious, her two children blending seamlessly into this newfound family. But the greatest transformation was Daniel himself. The world had known him as a ruthless titan, a man who built empires of glass and steel with no room for sentiment. Yet now, when newspapers printed his name, it was not tied to hostile takeovers or profit margins, but to acts of generosity that stunned even his harshest critics. He poured resources into creating foundations for disabled children, building dance and art centers across the city, each one carrying Oliver's name. The same man who once measured success in billions now measured it in the sound of children's laughter and the sight of their parents' tears of gratitude. The boardrooms where he once dominated with intimidation now saw a different Daniel. He spoke of legacy, not in terms of wealth, but in terms of humanity. "We can build towers that scrape the sky," he told his partners one evening, "but if they cast shadows on the lives below, what have we truly built?" The statement was quoted, replayed, and written into headlines across the world. A man who had everything and nothing had found meaning not in what he owned, but in what he gave. Yet, in the quiet moments, the heart of it all remained simple. It was the evenings in Oliver's room, where father and son still danced with Rosa, where music carried echoes of a mother's memory and a cleaner's courage. Those were the nights that kept Daniel grounded, reminding him that no matter how high his name rose, his greatest title would always be father. Oliver's health, though fragile, grew steadier with joy. Doctors marveled at his progress, insisting that laughter and love had done what medicine alone could not. He gained strength in his arms, his voice became clearer, and his spirit unbreakable. "Papa," he said one night as they watched the stars from the balcony, "do you think Mama can see us dancing?" Daniel's eyes glistened as he looked at his boy. "I know she does, Oliver, and I think she's dancing with us." Rosa stood nearby, her heart swelling with emotion. She had never sought recognition, never dreamed her small act of kindness could ignite such change. Yet she could not deny the truth. She had altered the course of 2 lives, and in doing so, countless others. Her children, too, thrived in the warmth of this new world, embraced not as outsiders but as family. One evening, Daniel gathered everyone in the ballroom. The staff, Rosa, her children, Oliver, and dozens of families who had come to share in the joy of the place. The chandeliers glowed brighter than ever, the floor alive with anticipation. Daniel stood at the center, no longer the untouchable tycoon, but a man humbled by love. He raised his hand for silence. "There was a time," he began, his voice deep and steady, "when this house was filled with nothing but echoes. I believed wealth could shield me from pain, that order could replace joy, and that silence was safer than laughter. But one day, I walked into a room and saw something that changed everything. I saw my son dancing, not with his legs, but with his spirit. And I saw a woman who reminded me that life, no matter how broken, is still worth celebrating." His eyes turned to Rosa, who lowered her gaze in humility, though tears streamed down her face. "This is no longer my house," Daniel continued. "It is ours. It belongs to every child who wishes to feel free, every parent who needs hope, and every soul who has forgotten how to dance. Wealth without love is emptiness. Power without compassion is weakness. And a life without joy is no life at all. From this day forward, let these walls never be silent again." The room erupted in applause, parents clutching their children, children squealing with delight. Music swelled, and soon the ballroom was alive with dance. Wheelchairs spun beside twirling dresses, sneakers tapped alongside polished shoes, and laughter rose until it seemed the very walls themselves were singing. Daniel held Oliver close, guiding his wheelchair in gentle arcs across the floor. Rosa danced beside them, her children clapping along, and for a moment, time itself seemed to stand still. The world outside might still know Daniel Hargrave as a millionaire, but here, within the glow of crystal light and music, he was simply a father, a friend, and a man who had rediscovered the beauty of life. And though the night eventually gave way to dawn, the story of what happened within those walls could not be contained. It spread from lips to lips, city to city, until it became something greater than one man, one boy, or one dance. It became a reminder to the world that kindness, no matter how small, has the power to shatter grief, bridge divides, and build legacies no fortune could ever buy. And so the mansion, once a fortress of silence, stood forever transformed into a sanctuary of joy, proving that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with thunder, but with the quiet rhythm of a dance between a father, a son, and a woman who dared to believe that even broken hearts could learn to move again.